Hello and welcome to your daily mobile game sizzle with me, Jon Jordan. So we're looking back at what's been going on with King, partly because it is now a year since Activision Blizzard closed its $5.9 billion all-cash acquisition of King. So what's been going on during that period of time? So let's have a look at King's performance over the last 5 years. So this graph looks a bit complicated, but really very simple. So if we look at the yellow columns, those are columns that we've taken from King's own financials. So King obviously was a company that did an IPO in 2014. So we can look back, had to release the figures previous to that as well. So we look back, 2013 is obviously the place at which Candy Crush Saga is released, and Glue's revenues, bookings in this case, shoot up. So the difference between revenues and bookings is revenues tend to be what they call GAAP revenues, which is a kind of a certain US accounting standard. Bookings, a bit more fluid way of actually seeing what bookings were kind of made in a period. GAAP revenue requires deferment over various months for digital purchases and subscriptions and such like so. But bookings basically is the most useful thing to look at in this case. So looking at these quarterly booking figures, we can see in 2013 they shoot up over $500 million, so $500 million of revenue per quarter. Clearly from that math, King was doing about $2 billion of revenue a year, and they even go up to over $600 million of revenue. So that was kind of the peak time for Candy Crush Saga. And then we can see 2013 to 14, roughly the same, start to decline a bit. 2015, 16, then we're seeing a decline start to accelerate. But it's still the case that by the end of 2015, which is when Activision Blizzard put its bid in, so it put it in its bid at the start of November 2015, King's still doing over $500 million of bookings every quarter. It's pretty solid on that basis. By this stage, it was doing quite well with some other Candy Crush games. It had Farm Heroes and Bubble Witch and that kind of stuff, but also had started releasing other Candy Crush, so Candy Crush Soda, these kind of games. It's kind of taking a franchise approach. So still a pretty robust business, even if sales had come off their peak. So then something interesting happens, at least from an accounting point of view. So if we look, you can see a blue column. So the blue column is actually for the period Q1 2016. So there's a bit of a problem here that actually Activision Blizzard completed the deal to buy King on the 23rd of February 2016. So in terms of Activision Blizzard's financials, it only had the company in its financials from the period the 23rd of February to the period 31st of March. So kind of a fragmented quarter. So for that fragmented period, Activision Blizzard recorded King's bookings as $207 million. So that's the smaller grey bar. So when we switch to Activision Blizzard's financial figures, we change colour into the grey bar. So the blue bar is a basic, slightly crude probably, interpolation of if that $207 million of that quarter, that kind of fragmented quarter, was spread over the entire quarter. So actually the entire quarter was 93 days. It was a leap year, and so you're kind of like just timesing up linearly that money. You can see that looks a little bit wrong. It looks like King decline had kind of stopped at that point. We do have to point out that obviously at that kind of juncture, we are looking at two different accounting methods, so it's not a great surprise that they don't exactly add up, but that's just why we have this kind of weird disconnect at that point. However, what we can say is in the 3 quarters that Activision Blizzard booked full quarters of King revenue, in all those quarters the revenue was down sequentially. So that can't be just due to the way Activision Blizzard is running its accounting system compared to the way King was doing it. We're definitely seeing a decline in King's revenue over that time. So the obvious question to ask here is, did Activision Blizzard pay too much for King? I think the answer is probably yes, but I think we knew that at the time. So as we can see, in 2015, King's sales were already in decline. Activision Blizzard would have known its sales were in decline. I don't think Activision Blizzard would have magically thought in 2016 that its King sales would suddenly start increasing. So in a sense, everyone knew that deal was an overpaid deal. It was depending on how you measure it, a 20 to kind of 30% premium on the share price or the value of King at that time. But the fact that Activision Blizzard overpaid somewhat for King doesn't mean it was a bad deal. Activision Blizzard now has a very strong mobile presence. It's also boosted its digital revenue, and it's also, because of the digital nature of King's revenue, it's also balanced its financial period. So what tends to happen with Activision Blizzard, which still has maybe a 40% component from retail, is that the March quarter is quite small and the Christmas quarter is quite big. So having King putting in, 400-500 million dollars of bookings every quarter just helps kind of even the financial year, which helps in terms of cash flow, and also helps in terms of making Activision Blizzard King look like a more solid company for in terms of the kind of share price. But perhaps the big irony of asking the question, did Activision Blizzard pay too much for King, is actually Activision Blizzard doesn't really care. The big thing that happened for it in 2016 wasn't integrating King into its business, it was the massive success of Blizzard's game Overwatch. So Overwatch has done phenomenally well and resulted in record profits and record revenue for Activision Blizzard, which is not really anything to do with King. It's purely because Overwatch was such a big surprise success. But nevertheless, a decline is a decline, so I'm sure Activision Blizzard will be looking quite closely at King to see what's going on there, to see how it can stabilize those sales. Already we're seeing some investment in new types of games, so a bit of a focus on mid-core from a new studio. Also, it's done some cost cutting. It has shut down some of King's older studios and got rid of some legacy games. So I'm sure there'll be more of that going on for 2017. And we'll keep an eye on it as well, so don't forget to subscribe to the channel and keep up to date with everything that's going on in the world of mobile game business.